good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from today. We are delighted to welcome you all to today's session, Scaling Test Automation, Achieve Scalability, Efficiency and Coverage. I am your host, Ashton Dixon Pemberton, Senior Marketing Manager at Source Labs, and I'm joined today by two co-presenters, Marcus Merrill, VP of Technology Strategy, and Nikolai Advolodkin, Senior Developer Advocate here at Source Labs. It is now my pleasure to hand over to the first of our presenters, Marcus Merrill. Go for it, Marcus.
Thanks, Ashton. It's great to be here. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Just wanted to say real quick that I think this is a great topic. I'm very glad we're covering this work because I think it's important not only for Source Labs, but it's also important for anyone who's trying to achieve quality. In the modern age of software that we're currently living in. I'll introduce myself real quick, hand it over to Nikolai, and then we'll get started talking about it. But really, as a starter, I just wanted to say that we're going to be showing 20 to 30 minutes of slides, and then we really want to open it up to questions. You've got about 35 years of test automation between me and Nikolai, 35 years of test experience between the two of us, and we kind of know what we're doing in the space, but we're also learning every single day. And I think it's really going to be important when we get to the end and I throw out terms like generative AI. I want to start a real conversation, have a real engagement, see if you have any questions for us about AI or anything. If you've been following Nikolai for a long time, you'll know he's been deep in it. So a lot to say there, a lot to say about the current state and the future state of the QA industry. Just general topics like that. We'd love to hear from everyone. Ask as many questions as you want. We want to try to answer as much as we can. So my name is Marcus Merrill. I'm the Vice President of Technology Strategy here at Source Labs. I've been in quality assurance or test adjacent space since 2001, so 23, 22-ish years. And I've been using Selenium since literally the day it was sort of merged with the WebDriver project, or the announcement was made in 2008. I've been using it as a test automation engineer to do scalable test automation projects for 4 or 5 different companies at fairly large scales. I wouldn't say massive scales, not at these Salesforce numbers, but at the more at the sort of mid-cap 800 plus employee company where we have thousands of tests, and keeping them green, keeping them stable, and learning a lot along the way. I came here to Source Labs because I thought that we had a unique insight and unique offering in order to be able to offer scaled test automation, and that the data that we're sitting on, the insights that we can offer, is second to none. So let me hand it over to Nikolai for an introduction. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks so much, Marcus. Yeah, happy to be here. Hello, everyone. Good day, good evening to everyone. My name is Nikolai Advolodkin. I'm a senior developer advocate here at Source Labs. I've been in the tech space since 2008. I was not as fortunate as Marcus to get started with Selenium. I actually got started with a tool called QTP. I imagine Marcus certainly knows what it is. I imagine nowadays most people have no idea what it is because it's so old and legacy and has been renamed so many times. But then I transitioned to Selenium and tried so many other tools. And nowadays I basically tried all the automated tools that exist out there. And it's funny, Marcus says how it seems like we have a lot of experience, but I still find myself scrambling every day to keep up with all the technological advances that are happening. In 2015, because I was so passionate about automated testing, and at the time the space wasn't as developed as it is now, I was finding a hard time finding resources online on how to do it well, how to grow and so on. I started Ultimate QA, and there I spent time blogging, creating video tutorials. To date, I've trained over 150,000 engineers in 184 countries. And just like Marcus, I've worked with a lot of different customers. I've been fortunate enough to be a solutions architect here at Source Labs, working with probably hundreds of customers across the world, helping them to implement better automated testing. And I'm super happy to share some experience with you all today.
Great. So like I said, we've got a few slides, 10 or 11, and I think there's some good content in here to sort of get you thinking. But then at the end, we're going to open it up for questions and conversation around where we are going from here, because I feel like nearly everything we talk about could be tied back to the concept of scalable test automation. All the tools that we'll be referring to, all the strategies we'll be talking about are aimed at helping you improve that part of your daily work. So let's start with the challenges. I'm gonna talk to these slides, and then Nikolai will pipe up whenever he wants. We look at this as kind of there's multiple different concepts of a test pyramid. It's funny, someone pointed out to me recently, why is the test pyramid actually a triangle and you all treat it like a pyramid? Well, it does have multiple facets if you think about it. We think of the baseline as like building and buying automation test infrastructure. It's one of the most core things you can do once you've determined the kind of tech stack you're in and the sort of the basic requirements. It's underlying everything that you do, choosing that kind of thing. You're trying to decide what kind of skill sets are going to go into it and who's going to maintain it, how much it's going to cost, all that stuff. It underlies every decision, and it really influences every single decision. On top of that, if you don't have the right strategy, you have no hope of being able to scale up whatever it is you're trying to do. We've seen a lot of things. I'll probably tell some stories as we go along about companies that I've worked for where I've been guilty of, or where I've directed people in other ways to worry about the strategy before you worry about the tooling, because strategy without tooling is kind of aimless, but tooling without strategy is absolutely pointless. So how are we going to choose the right automation framework? That's one of the challenges. And then building automation testing expertise within your personnel group, as well as building, maintaining the tests themselves. And I'm sure Nikolai has something to say about every single one of these topics.
Yeah, sure, Marcus. Just to add a little bit more and emphasize one point that I think is often overlooked. Actually, it's really funny because just last week, I was live streaming with Paloma Oliveira, who's one of our open source advocates here. And then we had Christian Broman that joined on the call, was showing us how to use WebDriver IO. And we had one individual come on the chat and ask us, what is the best tool to use, Cypress or like WebDriver IO? And I find, unfortunately, that's the wrong question to start on. You don't want to start on what is the best tool to use. As Marcus talked about, you want to start with the strategy first. What is it that you actually want to do? What is it that your organization wants to achieve? What are the goals of your team? What are the goals of your organization? What are your applications that you're testing? And then you get down into the technology level. And so I find that it's funny because a lot of times people will start at the top of the pyramid and then work their way maybe through the middle sometimes. And sometimes they'll touch the bottom, but yeah, just start with a strategy, and tooling will come that will align with that strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna pull out a bit of a metaphor, which I think is pretty apt. But hey, Nikolai, I've got an airplane that's broken. What tool do I use to fix my airplane that's broken? I mean, a screwdriver?
The one that people talk about the most on the internet.
Okay, all right. So if somebody does an article that says screwdrivers versus hammers, which is better? Like, kind of doesn't make sense, does it? So yeah, that's what we're going to get to. And Nikolai and I could both talk for an hour each about things like Selenium versus Cypress. And ultimately, the conclusion we'll arrive at is they're different tools. They should be used in different ways in different circumstances. And the people who create those tools would probably agree with that, as much as certain companies are benefiting from making that comparison with scare headlines and clickbait. So the next one, a lot of words on here. We're going to leave this slide deck with you so you can read this. But there's a huge gulf between the promise of what you get from automation and the reality that most people find themselves in. Companies start a top-down directive because they say, hey, automation will save us time. That's how Henry Ford was able to make the assembly line. Let's automate the creation of these tests. Let's automate all that stuff. Let's be able to run these things, a month instead of minutes. Let's get it to scale up. Let's remove the bottleneck of testing. And the reality people find themselves in 2 or 3 years in is that they're kind of stuck in this bloat where they did a tools first approach, not a standard strategy at first approach. They decided that we're going to go all in on user interface testing and not really worry about the middle layer APIs and functionality. They conflate the concepts of user interface testing and functional testing, where I might have to repeat myself here, but the purpose of a user interface test is often misunderstood. The purpose of a user interface test is to guarantee or to demonstrate that the user interface code is capable of rendering the outputs of an API. The purpose is not to test all the business logic in the product. I know, Nikolai, you've got stories about this, I'm sure.
I'm trying to think of some stories. Certainly, I agree with you that, yeah, the user interface is just the visual rendering of what our application is doing. And so what I think what's important to I don't want to dive into this right now. We'll talk about this later. Yeah.
Okay, great. No, I mean, I think the point is making, like, if you read this slide and you find yourself still aspiring to the left, but finding yourself mired in the right, then it's time to probably take a step back and really think about what you're doing. We'll definitely get into some more of the overcoming the challenges. We'll get into what happens if you do it wrong. And I know that a lot of people are finding themselves in the situation right now, and I've definitely got some stories to share around that. And for one thing, cost. It costs a lot to hire automation engineers. It costs a lot to get developers to write automation, and it costs a huge amount to teach manual testers how to write automation. So if you're doing it badly with no strategy and no coherent approach, your costs not only are going to be high, but they're not really going to be measured until probably something bad happens and the company has to sort of find itself budgeting, and they're thinking, oh, we have all these engineers over here, but we don't really have any demonstrable way of proving that they're of any benefit to us. So maybe they don't need to be here anymore. We're seing that a lot around the industry.
I have a scary story about that one, the cost part. Actually, during COVID, I was still a solution architect. What a solution architect does is it's a client-facing role. We basically help them implement automated testing better. And I was working with one like massive international client, and they had a team of 100 QAs working on their application. COVID came along. This was a hotel industry. They were very impacted, obviously. Laid off everybody except 2 people from the QA team. Because, as Marcus said, push came to shove, business needed to survive. They went to look at where costs can be cut and where value was not being generated. And the QA team was that place to make those cost cuts.
Yeah, I remember that story well. And their answer wasn't, we're not going to write automation anymore. Their answer was, we're going to shift from Selenium to Cypress as if that is the solution and make all of our developers do the work, as if that is an instant, like, okay, we don't need QA anymore. It's ridiculous, but it's also contagious.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Now let's talk about risk. I mean, all of this points to risk. What is testing if not risk mitigation? And yet, what I find throughout my interactions with people in the industry, I know Nikolai and I both speak at conferences all year long, all around the world, and I do not see the word risk thrown around very often in all but maybe keynote speeches at these conferences, because people don't have it at the top of their mind all the time. And it's my assertion, and I would love for people to sound off in the chat. It's my assertion that part of the reason that QA is currently under such threat is because we don't look at it as an industry from a risk-first approach. We look at it from a coverage-first approach. How do I make sure everything is covered without regard to what about the most important thing being thoroughly and always and quickly covered in a stable, sustainable way before I get to the rest of it?
Yeah, I agree with that, Marcus. To me, I see a very similar comparison between the insurance industry and the QA industry. Both of us are in the role of mitigating risk. And whenever, but really that is our goal. Our goal is to mitigate something horrendous from happening. Something horrendous from happening. And so it's also kind of hard to measure, like, how do you measure how much risk you've mitigated that never made it to production, for example?
Yeah. There was a a story about a company I worked for a while back where we were making constant changes to the analytics piece that it was an e-commerce site, and every time we a customer clicks on something, we're supposed to track the click, drop a cookie, and if that user then buys something from a vendor that we refer them to, then we get a commission cut. And they were making changes to these analytics things, and QA was simply not involved. They were not aware of this whole code path that was in the product. And at one point they broke, and I remember I don't remember the statistic exactly, but we lost like $200,000 before lunch because they broke the attribution part of a couple of the major pages on the site. What was my team busy doing? Creating test automation. We were busy making sure that the users could edit their avatars and change their profile page and make sure that they're, that they could interact with those kinds of pages on the site. We didn't know analytics existed. Now this was 2013, so it was a much earlier time in the industry. I think it's mature enough that a lot of people have encountered analytics now. But still, when I ask audiences at conferences, how many of you are testing your analytics? The answer is 5 out of 100, maybe. So those things break, and those things turn out to be the most critical aspect or way of getting revenue in the door. And QA wasn't even aware that they existed. Ridiculous, isn't it? But this is the world we live in. My team implemented automation for testing to make sure analytics worked. And at least for several years, that team was never really affected by budgets and layoffs because we had proven our worth. We had demonstrated our value to the executive level that we were saving and protecting revenue every day. And I feel like if you're not knee deep in that, or you haven't already kind of figured that part out, stop what you're doing and go do that. Otherwise, you'll continue to be irrelevant.
But a quick question on that, Marcus. That's an outstanding story. How did you all, and I find this to be a common pattern for myself, for many in the industry, how did you all demonstrate the risk that you're mitigating or the value that you're creating to management?
Well, the way we did it was, I'm trying not to get real technical because this involved things like sending web traffic through a proxy and measuring HTTP requests. But the way we actually demonstrated it was we showed that this user the automated test would pass even though the attribution was broken. And then we implemented this procedure that demonstrated that if you turn off a feature flag that sends analytic events, the automation test starts failing. And it says that this test is not going to pass until I see those HTTP requests going out. And then you turn the feature flag back on, the tests start passing again. And it sort of, it demonstrates for sure that if you can't prove that a test can fail, then the test is probably not of all that much value. One of my most embarrassing stories I've ever come across is an email I got from my manager. I think you've heard this one before, Nikolai, where they said, so you have 850 tests and our site was down last time those tests ran. I would like to know, how did 28 of those tests pass when the site was down out of 850 tests? And it prompted a whole lot of soul searching on my part because I couldn't prove anything about my test suite. I could make no deterministic statements about my test suite after something like that happened. And I think a lot of people might be in that state. Hope not, but maybe so.
I would venture to say a lot of us start there because the test automation industry, a lot of us are not taught in college how to test well, even as we might go through a computer science background. It's actually really funny. I did an interview recently on the test automation experience with a developer. Her name is Becca. Becca, and she was a boot camp graduate from, I want to say, Flatiron Schools, one of the most popular boot camps. And I asked her, did you all learn how to test there as you were learning how to develop? She said very briefly, and she didn't really understand what it was or what was happening. And so it's like, if you don't have that kind of understanding, the only way you're going to learn is on the job through making these kinds of mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's nothing can replace that kind of experience, but you do need to you needed to go into it with an open mind to basically say, oh, if in order to be able to look at HTTP requests that are being fired off by the back end of the server, I can't necessarily rely on Selenium, because Selenium as a tool, as a design principle, does not have access to things like HTTP requests. So I need to combine my tools in order to meet the moment. So what we did was, and I'm going to talk about this for 10 seconds, and then I'll refer you to a link because someone in the chat asked about it. The way we do is we run the web traffic through a proxy, and then we have code that is able to look at the requests and then start to break them down through key value pairs and use regular expressions to make sure the values are correct. If you Google my name plus the word analytics, you will find a talk from 2016 where I go over this. And to my never-ending frustration, the talk is still 100% relevant. Like, there's been no major evolution or innovation that has made this into a mainstream testing tool. Sort of an aspiration of mine at some point, but if you Google that term, you'll find the talk, and all the tools that I refer to, they've advanced in versions, but they're exactly the same, and the solution still works the same way. Okay.
Is it automated analytics testing?
Probably a talk I gave
from 2018.
From 2018, probably, yeah.
For Applitools?
Yeah, for Applitools. That's right.
Cool. I got a link here. I'll drop in the chat.
Great, cool. Yeah, I only have one window here, unfortunately. So I'm lucky to even be able to look at chat.
All good. I got you, Marcus.
So poor adoption also leads to security risks, lack of engineering user experience. Like, if we don't get this stuff right, then what we're left with is a whole bunch of failures that sort of go unanalyzed. And if we have failures that are going unanalyzed, then we're missing the chance to help our users make sure that they're having a good experience, right? So the benefits of test
Marcus,
automation.
could I add one more to that slide?
Absolutely, always.
That I think is important, and I found we also don't talk about enough, is automated testing done well creates a competitive advantage. So great examples are Facebook, Amazon, that release to production dozens, if not hundreds of times per day.
Yeah, like every 9 seconds or something.
Yeah, what that means for these kind of customers, and of course the expectation here is not that everyone will do it like that, right? We're all at different stages in our software development life cycles and evolution and maturity, but the competitive advantage that's created by this kind of capability is you stop analyzing your application in terms of preventing risk, and you start thinking of your application in terms of how quickly can I fix the bug that I introduced, where bugs kind of become more okay as long as they're not mission critical failures. And you can quickly push a feature into production, fix it if there's a bug, and not have it impact your business very seriously. Where in some other organizations that don't have automated testing in place, or have very poor automated testing in place, for them, they might have bugs in productions for weeks, because it takes weeks to develop, build, and test that feature. And so, of course, in such a fast-paced technology world today, every company is a technology company. And so if your company is not able to keep up with the competitors, you'll be losing customers to them and revenue.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you haven't lived through the transformation between that moment where you have to hold your nose every time you deploy your software versus having automation that you can count on to give you confidence that your release is solid, I mean, it's amazing. It's an amazing thing for your career. It's an amazing thing for your daily psyche, honestly. I mean, it's emotionally it's good for your emotional well-being. There's this moment where, it's just transformational. I had an idea for a story, but it'll probably come up later.
Did you also do the no deployments allowed on Friday, Marcus?
Oh, absolutely. No deployment on Friday. In fact, we had a time when I was the release manager for a process where it's funny, we went from a monolith to having like 20 microservices. It's a small company, 500 people. And I remember after we did the monolith to microservice, we were like, oh, well, now we need to make a security change to all 15 or all 20 microservices. So I had to coordinate releases like an orchestra conductor saying, now click that, now open that feature flag, now deploy that piece of software, now run those tests. Now, and we had to go through this time when some well-placed automation would have just made it to where everything green, all right, go. Or you don't even say that. The computer just ships it and you roll back because you use feature flags. And it's just, it completely changes the trajectory of the time you spend in your day, in my opinion. Having that kind of confidence. Yeah. So I like to joke there's over 1.5 billion test frameworks. The thing about that is that this slide was a template that was pre-populated with 1.5 billion. And I thought, I'm just going to keep that. 1.5 billion test frameworks out there. It sounds about right. There are more test frameworks than there are engineers. And that's probably, I mean, because everyone writes like 4 before they get it right? And browser operating system combos. I'm kind of the opinion that we still, as an industry, have to worry about Chrome versus Safari in particular. For the most part, Chrome and Edge are kind of, they're pretty much on par because they use the same HTML rendering engine. The interesting statistic I learned last week, I don't know if you knew this, Nikolai, Firefox is now less used in North America than Opera.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, now that probably has some
I don't know anyone that uses Opera.
Yeah, unfortunately, Sauce doesn't support Opera because my understanding is that Opera doesn't produce their own WebDriver capable thing. Anyway, not relevant. We find that the differences between Chrome and Safari are fairly big, but they're nothing compared to the differences between iOS and Android. Different teams, different implementations, different languages, different architectures, different everything. And I'd say over 800 combinations. Honestly, it's probably more like a couple thousand once you get into device, platform, operating system version, and then the things your app has to do to take account of all the different resolutions and the bezels and the weird little things that happen. We tend to test on iPhone latest, and that's simply not enough. There's all sorts of statistics that I can't put in front of you right now, but about how many things are still running older versions of iPhone. It's also industry specific. If you were working on TikTok, you probably can do the last 2 versions of iPhone and you'll be fairly safe. If you're working on an insurance or a elder care app, insurance app, something like that, you probably have to support older hardware, older technology. And there's just sort of no getting around it. There might be some debate. Like I should have said a range. Average manual test when I was doing this would tend to take 15 minutes because in my experience, manual tests tend to put everything but the kitchen sink inside the test spec. So they run huge amounts of steps and each test can reveal multiple things. Then when you automate that, you tend to break it up into smaller chunks and then you automate those. So this statistic is a little bit biased based on my own experience, but directionally, what the concept is the same. You are one person working in a linear workflow, and when you do your tests serially, one after the other, it's pretty easy to see that it takes years to automate or to manually test the things you can do in minutes with automation.
Yeah, not too long ago, Marcus, just to add to that. Yeah, just experiment of one, but I implemented some automated testing for a customer. And the manual tests, probably took 2 to 3 minutes for like the simpler ones. When running in CI, in parallel, three threads in parallel, our test run times were about 20 seconds per automated test. So 10x faster for automated tests versus the simplest manual tests.
Yeah. And then finally, I think the thing that we might end up talking about more in the Q&A is people are, this is a nervous time to be in quality assurance, to be in testing. Like the higher, more technical your skill set is, the more safe you probably feel, but like not fully safe all the way. And this is, in my opinion, and I would love to get your thoughts, Nikolai, this is, in my opinion, mostly the part of management for not understanding the value, but it's also a little bit the fault of us on the ground not actually pushing for this kind of relevance that I've talked about. We haven't made a demonstration of our value as an industry. And we also haven't pushed the bounds of innovation. I mean, if you think about all of the evolution of developer tooling since the mid 2000s, since I've been super big, super into the industry, since I finally decided that was going to be my career, cloud-based stuff, container-based stuff, fleet management stuff, AI, all sorts of stuff that's available to us. The constant evolution of UI framework, backend frameworks, programming languages. That stuff doesn't really seem to happen in QA. I'm still using a tool I started using 15 years ago. People are still using Quick Test Professional, if you can believe it. It's called UFT now. People are still, in my opinion, the most profound innovation in automated testing in the last 15, 20 years has been visual testing. Since Selenium, then it was visual testing, which is bringing a little bit of AI and a little bit of human vision onto the topic of testing. But other than that, we're kind of being left behind. And as a result, we're not able to move as fast. We're not able to scale as fast. And low code, no code testing is still kind of a pipe dream. Thoughts?
Yeah, totally agree with you, Marcus. I would say that even just looking at my career, interactions with the community, we've got to take some responsibility and blame for not pushing ourselves forward. And even myself, I'm learning how to better demonstrate value from my work as an automation engineer and tie that back to revenue, tie that back to business value, maybe end user experience. We've got to figure that out so that then we can display our value, and we've got to catch up with the rest of the technological advances that are happening everywhere. Like when I jump into the JavaScript world, for example, advances there are happening way too rapidly, actually. So many new frameworks coming out all the time. But then if I jump into like the other worlds of like Java and C#, where a lot of automated testing happens as well, those tend to be pretty static, and people are still talking about the same things we've been talking about 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, as an example, Selenium 4.11, which was just, or 4.12, I think, which was just shipped
4.12, yeah,
a couple of months ago, still supports Java 8. You cannot do Java 9 plus syntax in Selenium using Selenium because it requires it. I think as of the next couple of days, or maybe next couple of months, we're going to push up to 11.
September. Yeah. No more Java 8 support.
Right. So we need to catch up. And most Java code that I analyze from customer stuff is very much Java 1.6. Like it's that people tend not to understand the nuance between things like abstract classes, interfaces. They tend not to use generics. Forget about streams. Forget about lambdas. Like we are not pushing the state of the art. We're being pulled into where we are now, and like that's a misdemeanor. That's not a felony. To me, the felony is that if you ask any CEO, what's the most important thing in your job? It's risk. And if my career can be spent helping people understand and talk and speak the language of risk to their peers, I think this industry will start to grow into what it needs to be, evolve into its final form, I'm hoping. Kind of a pipe.
Just to throw out another kind of shocking thing that I encountered, one of the largest companies in the world, you all probably all have heard their name. I've worked with them. They still use JUnit 3 for their automated testing. And I was shocked when I was helping them with their code. And I do JUnit 3. I don't even know when that came out. I haven't ever used that. So
it was before my time. I think, I think, and I could have this a little bit wrong, please, somebody correct me in the chat if I'm wrong. I believe that the gentleman who created TestNG, Cedric Boyce, he works for JP Morgan, I think. I believe he wrote TestNG because JUnit 3 didn't do what he needed it to do. And I think that he wrote it kind of as a direct response to that. It became this really, really nice test orchestration framework. Then JUnit 4 and 5 came out, and they kind of, filled in some of the gaps, and now they're kind of on par with each other. But it's really interesting to see that. So risk first strategy, can't bang the drum enough. Once you've you can't figure out what your test automation tooling is going to be until you understand what the heck is it we're going to test. How are we going to test it? Who's going to test it? If you start with what does the money want? What is required for us to keep revenue flowing into this company, as opposed to editing the avatar? That's the kind of thing you got to focus on that. This next book, the reliability. This was Nikolai's yesterday. His absolute off the top of his head most important things around test reliability. Every one of these is a banger. What do you have to say?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, testing highest risk areas first, pretty much. Yeah, the drum that Marcus and I have been banging this whole presentation. Treating test code as production level code. That I think this is getting better, but we have to realize that automated testing is software development. Just because you're not building a user interface doesn't mean you're not creating a system. We're creating a system to test the system. And so all practices, all ideas that exist in the software development space, we have to apply that to automated testing as well. Keep your builds green. That's a really fantastic way to ensure that your automation is reliable and also valuable. And then when it becomes reliable and valuable, you can start demonstrating that to other teams, like your managers, managers, other teams across the vertical organizations, and showing them what you're doing, how it's keeping the quality of the application, how it's avoiding risks, and then that will spread and help you to maintain your job and make you hopefully into a rock star.
Yep.
And the next one is keeping feedback fast. So one of the values of automated testing, as we already kind of talked about, is the fast feedback loops that you get from automated testing, right? The reason why so many individuals or so many companies complain or will target the quality assurance departments first is over and over we've seen in data surveys that quality assurance still is claimed as the gate or the slow part of the entire software development lifecycle. And so how we mitigate that is through automated testing. And so what you want to do for me personally, I like a 10 to 20 minute feedback loop from my build, test, and deploy. To me, that seems good. If I can make it faster, that's fantastic. Where I don't want to see automated testing going is to start going beyond like 30 minutes, an hour. Some teams will spend nights executing suites of hundreds and thousands of automated regression tests, and then maybe analyzing the results. I mean, if you have hundreds of failures in the morning and you wake up, we have customers that will, and by the way, when I'm talking about all this, I'm not wanting to like badmouth anybody or say anything negative. I'm simply just sharing information and insights with you all, just in hopes that everyone here can improve. We've seen customers, because we run so many tests. I think we've run like what, 5 billion tests now, Marcus?
Almost 6.
Almost 6 billion tests inside of Sauce Labs. We have some customers that I've seen a customer, they ran 180,000 tests in a month with like a 60% pass rate. That means 40% of 180,000 tests failed. Who is analyzing those tens of thousands of failures? I highly doubt anybody is. And so, sorry, I went off on a tangent here. It started with yeah, go ahead, Mark.
I was actually about to go on that exact tangent around the analysis bullet here. If you don't analyze it, it doesn't matter. A similar story from someone I met recently who had 15,000 tests and 30% of them failed regularly. And my statement, if you're in that situation, is like, one solution is you could delete all the failing tests. That's one solution that would help you get some value back out. But honestly, my statement, if you're tolerating that situation, is not only are those failures, bad, not only are you not getting value from them, but you're actually misrepresenting the state of your automation and of your product, because someone in the organization is very happy that you're testing their widget. But what they may not know is that your test for that widget has been failing for 3 months and nobody cares about it. But they think it's covered, and it's not covered. So that means, for one thing, the widget obviously doesn't matter in terms of like, either it's so solid it never breaks, or it doesn't matter. So even if the test fails, even if the widget was broken, we'd ship the software anyway. Like, and then the other thing is, it's possible your entire test suite is providing zero value to the company. I mean, I think that's what people see when they see 15,000 tests, 10,000 of them passes. Are we getting any value out of this? I don't know. All right, so we're being asked to move along. Nikolai, you talk about this all the time. Why don't you take this slide?
Yeah, sure. So if you want to scale your automated testing, 3 important keys to it. Making your tests atomic. Atomic means that your tests focus on testing only a single feature. What is a single feature? Let's say you want to test out a shopping cart. A lot of applications, right, have a checkout functionality where a customer pays money and then the business generates revenue. In order to test the shopping cart, you don't necessarily have to step through the user interface to log in, to add an item to a cart, to search for the item, and then go through the entire checkout process. Because as you're going through that entire checkout process, you're actually testing numerous features. You're testing a login feature, you're testing search functionality, you're testing adding to cart functionality, and then finally, you get to testing the shopping cart. In a lot of applications, there are programmatic ways that you can set up the state of the application, such as using web APIs in order to log into an application, such as using web APIs in order to populate the state of a shopping cart, and then using the user interface only to test the exact features that I want. If you go to Ultimate QA YouTube channel, I did tons of tutorials there in Java, in JavaScript, that show different mechanisms of making your test atomic. Autonomous, this one, thank God, I'm now seeing less and less of, but it still should be mentioned that you don't want the outcome of your second test to depend on your first test. Why is that? Well, if your first test fails, your second test automatically fails. And it's exactly as Marcus said, now your second test failing, which you're implying there is A, either the feature is not working, which is not true. Then B, it means that you've now left a coverage gap related to that feature because your test never executed. So all tests should be autonomous. And if they're not autonomous, you'll never be able to run in parallel. And if you can't run in parallel, then it's really hard to scale your automation. And then finally, short. What you will notice with time is that the most stable, most valuable tests, and even you can say that maybe in terms of feedback loops and CI pipelines, are short. In fact, Sauce Labs a few years ago did an analysis of 3 billion tests. And what they found was a test that takes 2 minutes to execute is twice as likely to pass versus a test that takes 7 minutes to execute. And to me, it's common sense. It means that the more UI interactions that you have in your automated test, the more chances there are for something to go wrong. And invalid element locator, a synchronization issue, and so then you get more flakiness. And so keeping your test short and running just more of them in parallel, you'll get way better output from your automation.
Yep. I'm going to actually skip a little bit so that we can get straight to the QA. I just want to leave you with this thought. You're not leading with risk. You're not working on what matters. I encourage everyone to start thinking about what is the most important thing to my business. Am I covering that every single day? That's my early morning breakfast is, am I covering the most important risks? If I'm not, I fix that immediately. And then I go on to priority 2s, priority 3s. Cool. How are we doing, Ashton?
Yeah, I think we're good. We have about 10 minutes left, although we did start a couple of minutes late. So anybody that wants to hang around for a bit longer, feel free to. Sorry, I've had to hurry you up, guys. I would have happily stayed here for another hour and listened to you all day. But it seems that we have a lot of engagement in the Q&A feature, which is brilliant. We will start off with a question from George S. Why is there such a trend to skip/rush the QA process? At work, they recently pushed broken code to prod and had to roll back the version. afterwards, they pressured us to pass things before we finished testing. What are your thoughts?
My first thought is I remember in 2004, I worked for a tiny little SaaS company that got a brand new CEO. And this person, this human being who presumably had lived a life and used software in the past and had some brush with and a lot of authority over programmers, said the words, "What if we just wrote software without bugs? What if we just did that?" I think there's a fundamental broken understanding between some folks on that side and some folks on this side. And that's where I want to start talking about risk. How do we bridge that gap, the communication gap? Because their lack of understanding is maybe not our fault, maybe it is our fault, but their lack of understanding is the only thing we are going to be able to fix in order to save us from rushing the QA process, as you suggest. I don't know, Nikolai, thoughts? I could talk about that for an hour.
Yeah, when I think about like my career and being rushed through the QA process, I mean, why are we being rushed? It's because a feature was developed. We want to get that feature into production so that it can generate revenue or create some kind of value for the customer. And what stands in the way of getting that feature to production is quality assurance. And if quality assurance doesn't move fast enough and takes too long, then the team seems to get frustrated with that process. And so I believe that's kind of like maybe at least one of the layers of the onion of why QA is rushed, because we're not moving fast enough. If your tests take one whole day to execute, to validate a feature, that's too slow. It's not acceptable in today's time. And so adding something like automation where you can have a 10-minute, 20-minute feedback, I bet teams would be a lot more accepting of that. But even over time, of course, the baseline would reset, and now they'll say, okay, 20 minutes is too slow. Let's get it to 10.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think this is where, and Sauce Labs doesn't really have a dog in this hunt at the moment, but this is where feature flags are really your friend. Because if you can deploy code behind a feature flag, just it's not going to break anything if it's deployed. And then if you've done that, then you automatically have a rollback mechanism in place. It's no longer run a whole series of deploy scripts after you do a really painful 12-hour merge process. This is all behind a feature flag. So roll it back, pull it back, and get it out there, even if we do find something. But that's to mitigate against bad, a lack of testing. I just sort of I'm flummoxed by this statement. Afterward, they pressured us to pass things before we finished testing. Like what it sounds like they're saying is you shipped broken code because it wasn't tested. Now they're saying what we want to do is say the tests passed so that we can ship the code, even though it goes faster, but it still might be broken because we're not actually really testing. It's shocking. If that's true. All right, I want to move on to the next question.
Cheers. This one comes from Sid Sadiq. Thank you, Sid Sadiq, for your question. Would you consider test execution time to count setup time? It takes me almost a minute to get a source machine up and running.
Well, first of all, we're working on that with Linux instances. That should make things a little bit faster. But yes, as far as I understand that analysis, it did include setup time. It's funny, some companies that do test infrastructure will tell you they run your tests twice as fast because it's like under a minute. Well, they're measuring it from the time that the first Selenium command gets executed, not from setup time. So they're playing with a different timeline, and we could totally manipulate that stat if we wanted to, but we don't. So we give you the real answer.
Yeah, I think test execution time should be from the time you hit the run button or hit the command to when the test is finished, and your console will output that time in. Sauce Labs, of course, being in a cloud provider, is a bit slower, but how you combat that is through massive parallelization on demand.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys. Next question is from Kelly Stoner. Once you've determined your strategy, is there a magical formula that would help determine how large an automation team you will need?
And I generally don't think there's magic.
Yeah.
I think that Nikolai's point about automation code being production code means you scope it the way you scope any software project. People are also really bad at that. So I also don't have a magic formula for that, but I do believe that approaching it exactly the same way a product manager or engineering manager approaches scoping out, building a net new feature. I think that's the closest you're going to get to having a magic formula, is that people do that all the time and use their knowledge. I don't really believe in shortcuts. I believe that, getting to Mike Emmy's question, I believe that this is one area where generative AI is going to help us to be able to turn one automation engineer into three. But I don't think there's anything else that I would just say is just off the bat magic at this point.
As difficult as it may be to implement, I believe that to determine the right automation strategy and scale it and determine the team, it's a constant conversation with all the right people and adjusting based on that over time. I think it's just what you constantly have to do, and based on what you hear, based on what you learn, which changes all the time, you take the appropriate course of action.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Question from Mike. Mike, unfortunately, we had to skip this bit to ensure that we got the Q&A, but you kind of read our minds, it would seem.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about some of the challenges here related to AI/ML testing?
Well, I would like to know whether or not Mike means testing systems that are doing AI ML, so that you're actually having to write tests that validate whether AI ML is working, or is it using AI ML to assist in the daily work of automated testing? I'm curious about the to disambiguate that. But Nikolai, pick one, and what are your thoughts?
I will read it from the perspective of what are the challenges that are being posed on us as QA professionals from AI ML perspective. I believe there are going to be a range of people. On the one side, there will be people that accept and use AI in their day-to-day work, all aspects of work. There's no type of work that won't be impacted by this. And those are the people that will flourish. And on the other side, there are people that will fight it, and those are the people that will perish.
Yeah, I mean, I'm generally kind of a skeptic about stuff like this in general. Like Nikolai and I have had a lot of conversations about things like blockchain. When they get real hot, I immediately retreat to like, this is stupid. This one, however, dude, there's a lot here. You should see my ChatGPT transcript from the past 2 weeks. I've been trying to develop some developer tooling around some Sauce Lab stuff, and ChatGPT has made it to where I basically feel like I'm as productive as a 4-person team right now, because I'm able to do pretty much everything I need, because I'm able to get precise answers and examples for everything I need to do. And it's real. I'm not asking it to do things that are beyond its capabilities. And I think that's where people get in trouble. And that's where snake oil starts to come in. When you ask it to do things that you shouldn't be asking it to do. But if it's your assistant, and it's like the person handing you surgical tools at the operating table, but it's not doing the surgery for you, brilliant.
I actually just submitted a talk to a conference about replacing an entire team with AI, entire engineering team, because I believe it's coming and it's possible.
I think that there's still room for the human in there in a lot of places. I think that it's a multiplier. It's a multiplier, but it's not a replacement. That's what I would look at it.
I see a human orchestrator managing AI bots as a team versus that same human managing a team of engineers.
I'm not on board yet.
Yeah, for sure. No, I have data to prove it. No, I'm joking. No, this is just speculative.
Yeah.
Let's hope that's no time soon, Nikolai. Next question from Joe Paxton. Since automation and quality is a team effort, what are some of the suggestions to have other engineers understand the value of automation and quality? I find it a big hurdle as shifting left tends to add pretty significant cultural shifts along the process change, which can scare people.
The only time I've seen this work is when every single test was green until it was red because of a product failure. That means your automated tests are so tightly engineered that they don't fail unless there's a product change that was unanticipated or a bug that was found. If you do that, then your developers will automatically and enthusiastically start paying attention. It happens by magic, but I've only experienced this so few times. It's hard to explain just how transformative it is.
Yeah, I agree with Marcus. I've done this at a few organizations where the process I followed is figuring out where the risks are of the application, covering those risks with different types of automated tests, making sure that the automated tests are extremely stable and reliable. I like to think of our automated tests as almost representing the behavior of our application. For example, if our automated test fails and there is no bug, that is not a good failure of the automated test. If we're having 10 automated test failures per day, are we having 10 bugs in our system per day? If not, I would tighten up my system. And then once the system is really tight and reliable, start sharing it with other teams, whoever you're comfortable with. And slowly it will propagate through the organization and people will see what you're doing. They'll like it. And hopefully they jump on board. But the cultural part, Joe, I totally agree. The cultural shift actually, I think, is sometimes harder to overcome than the technological shift.
Sorry, I'm typing out a couple of answers here that we're not going to have time for.
Unfortunately, I was just going to say, Marcus, unfortunately, that brings us to time. Marcus and Nikolai, thank you so much for a truly thought-provoking webinar. By the engagement in the chat, it seems like I'm not the only one that was happy to stay here for longer than the hour that we have today. But unfortunately, this is where we have to call it. A few quick notes before we leave. To everybody that joined us today, first and foremost, thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. We do hope to see you on future webinars. Anybody with burning questions, feel free to send them over to webinar@sourcelabs.com and we will do our best to get you an answer. On behalf of the Source Labs team, thank you so much for joining us and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.